My name's Chris Trondsen. I have a Master's of Science in Counseling, and I'm an Associate Marriage and Family Therapist and an Associate Professional Clinical Counselor. So I was diagnosed with body dysmorphic disorder around the age of 21. I was diagnosed by a therapist. My original therapist I was seeing for obsessive compulsive disorder. When I really got comfortable with her and started opening up about why I was doing all of these compulsions, she thought I may also have BDD. I ended up seeing a neighboring counselor who was in the same area, and once I did a assessment, they definitely said, okay, you have body dysmorphic disorder as well. So I was diagnosed around the age of 21. My struggles actually started when I was really young with BDD. The first time I can remember is my parents and my family used to joke that they all had bags under their eyes, so circles, dark circles under their eyes. And I remember hearing that in about third grade and getting really paranoid that I'd get them as well. And so a lot of times I'd be watching TV and I'd see those commercials where they would have women putting these like lotions under their eyes and their dark circles would disappear. And so in the second, third grade, I started putting lotion under my eyes, being paranoid that I was going to get them. I also started getting ready in the dark, so I'd keep the hallway light on so I had enough light to see, but I would get ready in the dark because I felt like the light really made my dark circles look terrible. After that, in about fifth grade, I was obsessed with how my hair looked. I always wanted it to be flat and down. So when I was on the playground and all the other kids were playing handball and all the different games that kids play, I was constantly looking at myself in the shadows that the sun would make to see if hair was sticking up. And if it did, I used to hide combs in like a lunch bag, and I would sneak to this bathroom that most other kids didn't go to, and I'd be combing my hair the entire recess trying to get it perfect. So those were my original struggles when I was young, in like the middle school age. So high school is when it got the worst. Although I definitely continued to have symptoms in middle school, and elementary school is when it started, but middle school as well. In high school it got its worst. I started getting obsessed that I had terrible acne. I asked my mom to go to a dermatologist, and every dermatologist I saw said, you have clear skin. I actually ended up bullying pretty much a dermatologist into getting me on Accutane. And when I saw a new dermatologist, they took me off of it because they said, look, you don't have any acne. This is actually could potentially be damaging. I would constantly camouflage, so I'd sometimes steal my sister's makeup just to put it over dots because I didn't even want to leave the house. I wouldn't wear the color red because I felt like it brought out the acne on my skin. I'd wear hoodies to school all the time and try to cover up my face. I started not even attending school because of the fluorescent lighting I felt was very, very terrible and would bring out the red. I also would go to the grocery store and I'd spend hours looking through all the different new skincare products and buying them and going home and trying them. And pretty much it got terrible. My senior year, I stopped going to school and I potentially almost didn't graduate. I was able to scoot on by, but I was barely functioning at that point. It hit its worst after high school. I started to attempt to get a job in college and kind of live like the normal life. And unfortunately, it just kept getting worse. It started also adding that I felt my nose was too big or I had too big of a forehead. I didn't like my jawline. I could no longer concentrate in class. I ended up quitting school and dropping out of work, living on my savings. And most of my day was spent looking in the mirror, trying to fix the imperfections that I thought I had. It hit a low point in 2002. I got to a point where I didn't feel like there was any end. I kept going to different dermatologists and doctors, and they said nothing was wrong with me, and they didn't see what I saw. So I got really, really depressed. I began to isolate and spent about 3 years not leaving my house, and that's when it hit the worst low. In 2002, it got to a point where I felt I no longer could live. I was constantly having suicidal ideations because I just didn't feel human. A lot of times when people think of BDD, they think of it as someone being vain or not liking what they see, when in fact I felt subhuman. I felt disgusting. I felt like I didn't look good enough to live. And the only salvation I would have is spending all my time in the dark alone. So in 2002, it got to its lowest point in October. I had seen a movie, and in the opening scene, a character plugged up their exhaust pipe to take their life, and it was the first time I was happy in a long time. I felt that this was going to be the one way I could get away from these thoughts and these feelings. So in 2002, I attempted suicide. It's probably the lowest point in my life. I was fortunate that my roommate came home and ended up calling the authorities and getting me the help I needed. But after that point, my family did get involved, but I was still at a low depressant point. And it wasn't until about a year later where we found the proper research and a diagnosis when I was around 21, 22, that my life eventually started to turn around for the better. I think the hardest part about BDD and the depression that it brought was all that I lost. I had played sports in high school. I was captain of the volleyball team. I played tennis, football, and soccer. I always had a lot of friends. I was outgoing. I like to be around my family and joke. I'm Greek, and so we pretty much have 1,000 family members in the facility. So that was just my life. I was always out and social, and I became a shell of myself. I isolated those 3 years I spent in my house. I didn't want to see people. The BDD convinced me that I had deteriorated in my appearance even worse from high school, so I didn't want people to see me and ask what happened. And so the worst part of it all was just that isolation and that lonely feeling, waking up each day knowing it was just going to be by myself. So going from that outgoing athlete that loved to be around people to someone that couldn't even function and was isolated was probably the hardest thing that it took from me. So I had never heard of BDD, and when I had the suicide attempt, my mom, we were very close before the BDD really took a turn for its worse. She did find a therapist originally through my insurance, and unfortunately had no clue what even OCD was, let alone BDD. So my mom did a lot of research and ended up finding the International OCD Foundation, and OCD sounded the closest of what I was dealing with, and I did have OCD. So when I started seeing the OCD specialist, my life started to turn around on the OCD element. But I was still so shameful, I think, especially being a male, just talking about my appearance. None of the guys I knew at the time, well, I didn't really know anybody at the time, but none of my guy friends in high school and after were talking about their looks and their appearance. So I was shamed. I didn't want to open up, but I eventually built enough of a trust with this therapist to open up to her. And luckily there was a body dysmorphic disorder support group just opening up. And she's like, I really think you have this. So when I went and did the assessment to be a part of the group, I literally felt that this therapist had been like hiding in my bushes, writing notes about my life, because everything he said in the assessment was me to a T. And I finally had a name to this thing that had taken so much from me, and I finally had a title to call it, and I knew it was a disorder and I could turn around and start to beat it. So that was really the turnaround for me, is when getting properly diagnosed. I felt like it wasn't something wrong with me as a person, it was something going on in my head, and I could beat it if I knew what to do. So when I first started out for treatment for body dysmorphic disorder, getting that education in the first part was so essential, just learning about the signs and the symptoms and the diagnosis and what I was going through. And the biggest shift for me was taking that leap. Even though when I looked in the mirror and I saw something, I started to learn that I couldn't trust my own eyes. I couldn't trust my own perception of my reflection. So we did cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, and we did exposure and response prevention, known as ERP. And what the treatment really asked me to do is say, look, what have you been avoiding? And what are some of the behaviors that you do because you don't like your appearance? So an example, I was consistently looking in the mirror. I would spend hours in the mirror, first thing when I'd wake up, last thing before I'd go to bed. So I had to have a new relationship with the mirror. Instead of running to it at every free chance I had to analyze my imperfections, it was only using the mirror when it was absolutely necessary, and making sure that I was only using it for grooming and not for checking. Another thing that I unfortunately did at the time is I felt I had a lot of acne. So I would take like skin wiping pads, and I would take tweezers, and I'd put the pad over the pimple and I would dig it with tweezers, and it was causing a lot of kind of redness and scarring. So that was a big part of my treatment as well, was to learn to not pick and do some habit reversal with that. A big part of my treatment was to get back out in the world. I'd isolated for so long, so I would slowly start to go to the grocery store late at night. And then I would start to go to the grocery store during the day when it was a little busier, but still less busy. And then eventually going at some of the prime times and looking people in the eyes. So a lot of changing the behaviors, giving up some of the compulsions. So some of the behaviors like camouflaging, couldn't do that anymore. Purposely wearing red. Those were some of the behaviors I changed, as well as getting out and being around people. But the biggest component was really learning how to challenge my thoughts. So some of the automatic thoughts that would come up, that I was unattractive and worthless and nobody would like me, it wasn't letting those slide anymore. It was challenging it back with, hey, the only time that I've been unlovable is when I've isolated because of this disorder. But I've had the same appearance my whole life. Sure, it's changed a little bit, and people always loved and respected me at that time. So maybe it's the disorder and not really my appearance. And then lastly, it was really just about accepting that I'm so much more than my appearance. So I started looking at all the different things about myself as a person and started doing those things. So I love to be around people, so starting to go out and make friends again. I want to be fluent in Spanish, so taking Spanish classes. I wanted to date again, so starting to date. Being a brother, being a son, and getting back with my family. So doing that took about 2.5 years, which is pretty long, but it was severe, so I needed that. But it gave me the tools for life. And so as I continued to rebuild my life after treatment, I had the tools to equip myself with anything that came up. So there's a lot of stigma with mental health in general, which is difficult. With body dysmorphic disorder, some of it I think was definitely about me being male. So when I was comfortable enough opening up to people, and when I say this, I don't want to take away from females with body dysmorphic disorder at all. I just know for me personally, I was really uncomfortable opening up because the times that I did feel comfortable enough to open up to people what I was going through, because I had to kind of explain why I dropped off the map for like 5-6 years, people didn't get it. They didn't understand, and okay, why do you do that? So nobody, I think, ever got it. I think the only two people still in my world that understand it fully is my mom and my sister closest in age. A lot of people just thought that I was vain, or I cared so much about my appearance, or, oh, maybe it's because he lives in LA and that's what he cares about. So when you deal with a disorder and you kind of deal with it in silence without much of a support system, it's hard. You need that support system to lift you up on those difficult days, and I didn't have that. And it's not that I want empathy from society, I just want understanding, and I don't think I've ever gotten that. And it isn't until I meet other people with BDD or other clinicians or talking to people at mental health conferences, it's like a family that gets it. I see the heads nodding along. But still, I think there's a terrible stigma, and there's a lot of judgment, and that's something that I hope one day will completely be different, and this will be something that people can talk about much more comfortably, and people don't have to hide and live with it in shame. The easiest way I can ever explain BDD to people is people do understand anorexia. And so I explain that when somebody has anorexia and they look in the mirror, we can see them as thin. They look in the mirror and they see themselves as overweight. And you feel like, what's going on? How come she sees or he sees something completely different than I do? And BDD is pretty much the same thing, except on the face. It doesn't have to, it can deal with neck down, but the majority is neck up. And so when I explain to people what I went through and what I go through, I say when I look in the mirror, I see something completely different. At times it almost feels like a puzzle that wasn't correctly put together. And so a lot of times I have to remind myself that what I see is not what society sees. And it plays tricks on you. It's hard when you're tired and you look in the mirror at times. But the amazing thing is you have tools. And even though you have slip-ups or have a hard day, you don't count yourself out. Just like in sports, you get yourself back up again and you go fight and you harder. So I explain to people, that's all it is. I look in the mirror and I see something completely different that doesn't look right. And just like anorexia, the treatment helps us see a much more realistic picture of ourselves. So I lived in Los Angeles, and before I got really sick, I worked in the entertainment industry. I worked behind the scenes, so I worked in production and worked on television shows and commercials and everything like that. And once I got better with treatment, I wanted to go back into that field. So I went back into the film industry, the television industry. I ended up doing a lot of on-camera work. It kind of happened by fluke, and so I was at different events. American Idol I worked on for a long time behind the scenes. So You Think You Could Dance, Family Feud, different TV shows, and I would interview celebrities. And that was really difficult having BDD, being on camera, especially when they had me watch back the footage. And it was using those tools and really doing that and thriving. And it got to a point where I became really comfortable. I was no longer analyzing my appearance and looking at everything. But something was missing in my life. There was something deeper I wanted. And I started with the International OCD Foundation and being an advocate. I started speaking to other clinicians and educating them on BDD, as well as talking to people that have it. And I loved it. But I felt like I wasn't doing enough. And eventually I got approached by a treatment center near my house, and they said, look, we're opening up a support group. We would love somebody that has lived experience to help run it, and I did. And I would be at these events, these red carpets and these premieres, but I was always looking forward to Tuesday nights because I would run that support group. And I said, hey, maybe that part of my life is done and I need to go on a new path. And so I started going back to school. eventually graduated, and now treat obsessive compulsive disorder and body dysmorphic disorder and related disorders. But I'm doing really well. I've learned that I'm so much more than my appearance. I have friends now. I constantly go out. I enjoy like hiking and adventures and traveling. I love to be around people. I love to get out. I'm my old self again. And so it's been a complete 180 from when I was at my sickness, to be able to go to school, graduate school, and now turn around and help, have friends, date, and enjoy life. And I realized, like, yeah, I'm always going to have in the back of my mind certain critiques of myself. As you age, there's always kind of new things that get thrown at you that you have to overcome. And we can't forget the conversation about social media where everything is edited and people, and myself included, compare ourselves to pictures that have gone through 6 or 7 different filters and modifications. However, BDD is not number 1, 3, 7, 50 of my list of difficulties. Driving in LA traffic is much more negative impact in my life than BDD. So it's no longer something that runs my life. I'm no longer a sufferer with the disorder. I feel like I've survived and thrived, and my life is where I want it to be. I think last thing I'll say about my life too is going through that has made me appreciate life so much more. Having that time taken away from me has turned me into somebody that wants to take life to the fullest. So even if I'm just in martial arts or reading a book, it's just being present and grateful for what I have. Motivation is key. There's going to be those hard days where you slip up. I think that's when your support system is great. Reaching out to my mom, my sister, a friend, even if the friend doesn't understand BDD, just being able to be like a support system. Let's get out, let's have fun. My motivation is life. I really wanted to be the person that I wanted. You think about who you were at 8 and who you thought you're going to be as an adult, and I want to make that 8-year-old proud. And for so long I spent so much time on something else. And then lastly, my big motivation is I know how many millions of people out there are suffering with this illness and have no support, no therapy, no help. And so that's what drives me. So anytime that I'm low or I'm having a hard day, I think of my clients, or I think of the people I'm going to touch by opening up and sharing, and that motivates me to want to do better and be better and keep pushing forward. There's millions of people in the United States. I think 1% to 2% of the population. I wouldn't be surprised if it was much more. And 1% to 2% always sounds low, but when you think of how many millions that is, that's a lot of people. A lot of people with BDD don't want to talk. They don't want to go to therapy. Either they don't think that they have a problem that can be fixed with a therapist. They want to go to a dermatologist or a plastic surgeon, or people are shameful and are hiding in the house and don't feel good enough to even go out and get therapy or even talk to people about it. So there's millions of people out there struggling with this disorder. I do think there's been some people, celebrities that have come out. I don't know his last name, but his first name's Reed. He's in Modern Family, and he came out about struggling with BDD. But the more the stigma is knocked out, the more people, both celebrities, but just average people going through this, come out and talk about it, I do believe it will pull more people out of the shadows. They'll be much more likely to seek treatment and at least talk about it. And that normalization will have people be willing to open up and to share, and so it won't be us, trying to pull back curtains to find people struggling. But yeah, it is way more people than I ever thought when I was going through it. I thought I was going through it by myself, and to find out that there's millions of people across this globe struggling with BDD was refreshing. And then of course it will be a great day when those people are able to get help. One thing about BDD is there's such shame, embarrassment, and negative feelings to your appearance. There's a lot of fear of being judged and dismissed and not fitting in. Externalizing the disorder really helped me with the shame. What I mean by that is recognizing that I am not BDD. I am not a BDD person. I'm an individual that happens to have BDD, and I'm so much more. And when I started to recognize that this wasn't a weakness, this wasn't something I did, my parents did, the environment did, this was something that was going on with my brain, probably influenced, of course, by society, but this was something that had treatment and could get better. And just like somebody born with lupus or somebody born with diabetes, that's not their fault, and there's no reason to own that. And so once I could start to separate myself from the disorder and recognize that there was nothing that I was doing wrong and there wasn't something wrong with me as a person, it allowed me to kind of get into that mode to fight to get better and no longer own the negative feelings that I had because of my appearance and the disorder. So in my own role, my mom and my sister closest in age, they were such an instrumental part But I know their struggle was difficult too. They saw their brother and their son, who was once this lively, upbeat kid, completely shut down. The most difficult part is they saw me struggle, and parents and loved ones out there who see their loved ones struggling, you want to fix that. You want to dive in there and help them. And unfortunately, this is something the individual has to go through themselves. But I do think you can encourage them, bringing them education and information, not drowning them in it, but just bringing them any kind of empirical studies or education that you can give them. It's letting them know you're never going to give up on them, that you love them 100% and you'll always be there in their corner, and that you want to see them get better. Talking to them about their goals and what are their things they've given up that they want back, and giving them that fight back in themselves. It's going to be a hard road. There's going to be times that you don't get it, you don't see it, you don't understand why they don't just get over it. But the judgment and the negativity isn't going to help. It's really just being that loved support one. I will say one tangible thing that helped is in the beginning when I was really struggling, my mom did do a lot of the legwork, finding the therapist, calling them, setting up the appointment, driving me to appointments, because I needed that. I needed that accountability. Making it not an option. We're here for you, we love you, but we're going to get you help. All of that really pushed me through. And then lastly, it's great to have them be a voice of reason. So those dark days when I wanted to just go to bed and give up, them reminding me of my successes and all that I've come through and all the strengths that I have. And that would remind me that, hey, I've done a lot more in my life than I thought. And even though I'm being beat up in my head right now and discouraged, this isn't true. It's just a feeling. I can push through it. I want to say there's treatment out there. And so as a family member, as a loved one, it's remembering that there's hope. People do get better. It's just about encouraging your loved one to seek out that treatment and get help. So if you have BDD, I know that there feels like there's absolutely no hope. You feel there's something wrong with your appearance, that you're less than, that you're inhuman, you can't be loved, there's no point to go on. And what I want to say is I've been there. I've been at that low moment. I've been at that time where I've wanted to give up. I get it. I want to remind you that you're more than your appearance. You're more than your looks. It may sound crazy that what you see in the mirror is not accurate, but I promise you that it is. And even though you've tried so hard to fix whatever imperfections you have, and you want to try the next doctor, and you want to try the next dermatologist or dentist or cosmetic surgeon, I promise you that that's not the answer. It's not about your appearance. You have a disorder that is telling you there's something wrong, and it's having you try to fix it in the wrong way. So give treatment a try. I know it's scary, but find someone you trust, somebody that is educated in this field and is a specialist. Go at a pace that's comfortable for you. And I can tell you as a living testament, I went from isolating myself and living at home and attempting suicide to being able to live a full life without doing any surgeries or any fixing of my appearance. So I promise you that although it seems hopeless at this moment, take it a day at a time, a step at a time. Don't think of the big picture, you'll get there, and remind yourself why you're doing this. What do you want to take back in your life? What meant so much to you before BDD hit? Go after that. That's always going to be more important than your appearance. At times when you're going through something and you're battling to fight, you can think of the big picture and that becomes overwhelming. Obviously, the big picture is to get better, but how that's going to happen and what that's going to look like, you may not even be there in that moment. So sometimes breaking from that and being in the moment, being mindful, being present, making goals that are tangible that you can reach and taking it day by day, step by step, it doesn't feel as overwhelming. And when you start to get some of those successes, success breeds success. I'm pretty sure you're in a different mindset and you're no longer feeling like a victim and feeling like you can't achieve anything. You're starting to see tangible results, and that's going to motivate you. So breaking it down for me helped a lot, and it wasn't until the end of treatment I started looking at that big picture of getting my life back, but it was not the time to think about that when I was still at the starting point. One other thing that helped me in my recovery was I did get on medication. I went on Prozac. It wasn't a fix-all, but what I noticed is that the anxiety and the tension that I was constantly feeling, I got some relief from that. I think it aided me in being much more willing to push through with the exposure work and get out there because that anxiety wasn't as intense. But I always remind myself that medication doesn't change behaviors. The medication isn't a fix-all. It's going to aid you in your journey, and you really have to do the work. I also think that it's an individual thing. I ended up getting off medication after treatment because I had the tools and the skills that I needed to build my life back up. But I do think that everybody, it's individual if that's something that can help for them.